Welcome to another episode of Tons Two Cents, the podcast where we explore the intricacies of government contracting world and offer insights to help you succeed. Today's episode is titled Creative Contracting. I'm your host, Ton Wilson, and with us today is Dolores Kuchina-Musina, an expert in the GovCon field and the co-author of Public Procurement for Innovation. Dolores, thanks for joining us here today and say hello to our listeners, the intellectuals, and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Ton. This has been just so exciting that we finally connected. I know we've been on LinkedIn for a long time, so this coming to fruition is so exciting. A little bit about myself. I started out actually in commercial contracting and got into government contracting because I was really fascinated by it. So I'm one of the weirdos that wanted to do the space and wanted to get into it.
Right.
Been doing it for almost 15 years now. Got my PhD. My dissertation is on other transaction authorities. Wrote the book, read about it for fun. So, this has been an exciting topic for me to talk about, but also just in general, something that I really enjoy and something that I view as both an art and a science.
So, Dolores, thanks so much for that introduction. And you don't normally see people who go from the commercial side to the GovCon side and make that transition so successfully and write a book too, which is really kind of how we connected. Besides, we have a mutual friend who connected us together. But this conversation is going to be so interesting because I'm so interested in hearing your insights in the government contracting, having been on the other side. So, before we dive into our main topic of discussion here today, can you share a little bit about what inspired you to write your book on creative contracting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, talking about what inspired me to write about creative contracting, I think it was mostly because in order for you to be creative when it comes to contracting, you have to understand the policies that drive the different authorities that we have and the different contract types. And so it's kind of like when you're painting or when you're drawing, you have to understand the tools that you have. Are you using pencils? What medium are you using? What type of paper? What kind of canvas are you using? You have to understand that and you have to understand how to work with that. And you can't do that without having a primer, without having a basic information on what you're working on, how you're going to work on it. So the book was really for me a way for people, one, to not view contracting as something scary and policies as something scary, but for them to really view it as, hey, this is my baseline, this is how I'm getting all of my materials ready for my work of art, for me to sit down and to really think through this and what it's going to look like all together.
So I love the fact that you talk about things as a canvas and painting. You can definitely tell that you have a very creative, imaginative side to you, which is really kind of our topic of discussion here today. So, rolling into segment one, understanding creative contracting. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is creative contracting in the government space?
Great question. So I'll start with the complex and work the way down. So, in a complex way to describe it, it's a framework where you're aligning your contract or your agreement based on the analysis of the requirements and what your intended outcomes are that you're trying to achieve. So, in a simplistic way, it's really understanding what you have in order for you to leverage in the state that your business is in or in the state that your solution is in, and trying to figure out how do you use this specific pathway in order for you to close the deal. Everybody has their own preference on the type of contract or agreement they want to use. Everybody has a preference of language and how they read those terms or how they interpret certain combination of words, right? So, understanding at least from the baseline, like the analogy of the canvas, you're kind of starting out with, am I doing a drawing? Am I doing a painting? Am I doing a sculpture? What am I actually building out here and what is it going to look like? And then looking at the proper award instruments, whether that's another transaction, is it a FAR Part 13? Are you looking at FAR Part 35? Are you doing a purchase order? Are you going to do a purchase card? How are you going to execute this? And getting creative in the sense of being able to utilize those tools the way that you need to for what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the government and industry in particular don't understand the reason why the government and for specific services or whatever it is that they're trying to procure, why they use certain vehicles or certain tools, for that. So, you can't just, use, a brush if you're doing like a sculpture type of thing, right? So if you're selling commodities, vices services, there's reasons why, you use certain types of, procuring mechanisms. And I think there's not, I guess, is it because it's a scary or a difficult concept for the average layperson to understand why maybe so many people in government contracting don't quite grasp that?
I think it comes more from just our natural human behavior. We go with the familiar, we go with what we work in every day. So I'll use an example that my mom taught me a very long time ago. And she's a physicist. So, like, that creativity has always been in there and looking at problems in various ways. And so she has told me, she's like, how would you measure a building? And my first question was, okay, well, what do I measure it with? And she's like, it's unlimited, right? Like, how would you measure it? Give me all the multiple ways. And it's the same thing here. We know in GovCon, right? We have to know what color of money, what is the budget, what are we working with, a commercial business, a small business, a large business, a non-traditional. We take in all of those elements, and I think a lot of times our perception is we view them as restrictions or in some way limiters to what we can do, instead of first putting out all of those pieces on the table and saying, we know we want to accomplish this effort this way with all of these things out on the table. How can I look at this and put this together for it to make sense? And what a lot of people do is they go, well, my office only does IDIQs or indefinite deliver, indefinite quantity contracts. So if you're trying to do something else, don't come to me. And it's not necessarily that it's a no, it's just that the industry partner didn't quite understand that that is the limiter, or that is what the resource that that office wants to use. If you're trying to find someone that is willing to be a little bit more creative in the GovCon space, you have to find a like-minded individual. We see this, in our daily lives too, right? We approach a problem, and if we just had 5 minutes of quiet, we would probably approach that problem in different ways, instead of, trying to just close the deal or trying to just complete the task as fast as possible. There might be an easier way for us to do it. And after we finally like think about it, we're like, oh wait, why did I just make it so much harder on myself when it was so easy that I didn't see that solution? And it's part of our human nature, I think, to sometimes not give us enough time to think things through and to really take into all of the factors, all of the elements that are playing in, and put them together in a different way than what we're used to seeing them as.
Totally agree, and I think it goes back to the fact that I don't know if it's human nature or if it's just the industry that we work in, is that why overcomplicate something when it doesn't necessarily have to be overly complicated? And so we almost need to kind of go back to a more simplistic view of how we view things, is that life is busy and complicated enough. There's certain things you don't have to overcomplicate it. And so I think sometimes people do that to show their importance, or how smart they are, or like, aren't I brilliant? I came up with this, like this the entirely new way of procuring or whatever. It's like you didn't have to do that. There was already a mechanism in place. It's like it's almost like creating a new law just to have a new law. It's like there's already a law in the book. Let's just kind of enforce that type of thing. And it really kind of is mind numbing sometimes. So it's refreshing to hear someone else who feels what I believe is that just relax, right? Just relax and just let's think through this a little bit before we go into such a reactive, type of mode.